Hello and welcome back. Well, when is an update not an update? And I'm asking this question because Photoshop has just had a new update as of January 2026, a small dot increase with a few new features added. But are they really new features, or are they just a bit of fluff designed to make you think that they've actually done some work to update the program? So let's jump in and have a look. Well, one of the things that happens when you have a subscription model for your software is that you need to keep your customers happy by continually putting out updates. And sometimes those updates are worthwhile, sometimes the updates are fairly meaningless. And in this case, I think most of the updates that they've put into Photoshop have been a little bit superfluous. There are a couple of things that are worthwhile, but the majority of these so-called new features are a bit ordinary and don't really do anything that we can't already do. But of course, all of the YouTube fanboys that will rave about anything because they get their income from producing videos about Photoshop and Lightroom will be raving about this as being a great thing. But in actual fact, I don't think it's anything particularly exciting. So let's have a look at what the options are. Well, we have some new adjustment layers. We have a new thing called the color and vibrance adjustment layer. We have the clarity and dehaze adjustment layer, and we have a grain adjustment layer. Now, as far as I'm concerned, these are not really doing anything that we can't already do already. But let's have a look at them, and you'll see what I mean when we get into it. I've already created some adjustment layers here. This is a photograph of ours from a recent trip to Japan. And so let's have a look at color and vibrance adjustment layer. Well, you've got the color, temperature and tint, you've got a vibrance adjustment layer, and you've got a saturation slider. So, well, you know, if you use the saturation slider, that's pretty disastrous. Double click on the word to reset it. What about vibrance? Now, when we work with vibrance in our Lightroom or our Camera Raw, it's a little more subtle, but guess what? It's awful. Absolutely terrible. And of course, we can change the temperature and the tint, but realistically, if you're working on a raw file, this is one of the basic steps you will have done when you first process the image in Lightroom or Camera Raw. So I can't really see the point of having this as an extra adjustment layer. So to me, color and vibrance, yeah, it's not really going to do anything for us. So what about the clarity and dehaze? Well, of course, we have clarity. Let's have a look at what it does. Yes, it does pretty much the same thing that we do in Camera Raw. And yes, used sparingly, it gives us a little bit of more mid-tone contrast. Dehaze, well, yeah, dehaze gets rid of the haze, but of course, it boosts the saturation dramatically. So if you're going to use that, I think you should be doing this all in Camera Raw or Lightroom. So again, it's an adjustment layer, but why would you bother with it here? And in fact, let's go to the last of these new adjustment layers. And I'm not a big fan of putting grain in photographs in any event, so I'm a little bit biased here, but one of the reasons why I went from film to digital was to get rid of the grain and get a nice, smooth, clean, crisp image. But what can we do with a grain adjustment layer? Well, let's go the whole hog, and we'll need to zoom into probably 50% at least to see the effect of this. And you can see here, pretty horrible, looks like an old reticulated image on film. And then of course we can change the size of the grain, and we can change the roughness of it. But all it really does, it doesn't really soften the image at all. It's just adding this horrible texture over the top of the image. And of course I've gone crazy here with the amounts and so on, but just to give you an idea of what it does. And again, it's not doing anything that we can't do in Camera Raw. So why would we even bother with that? The smart way, if you got to this point and you're working in in Photoshop, and you decided you wanted to make some further tweaks to that raw file, well, the simple solution would be, and I'm just going to make a duplicate layer here, is convert this duplicate layer to a smart object, and then go into the filters, camera raw filter, and we've got all of those adjustments available to us within the camera raw filter. And of course, when we start to look at things like dehaze, there it is there. We've got grain, but interestingly, I think the grain in camera raw and Lightroom works a little more subtly. You can see here, we'd have to zoom in a lot more to see it, but you've got the same sort of effect, but you've got it here in the camera raw filter. So why would you even bother with that? Let's just double click to reset that, or in fact turn it back to 0. And so why would you even bother with those adjustment layers? And you could go into here, you could then apply a mask if you wanted to selectively apply one of those treatments to it, using your mask tools and then applying those settings. So there's not really any advantage that I can see in any of those new adjustment layers. We're just going to cancel out of that and go back to our image, because those 3 new adjustment layers are really, to my mind, not doing anything that we can't already do, and probably do even better in our raw processing. Now, the second series of updates moves us into this sort of questionable area of AI tools. And as you would know, there are certain aspects of using these AI tools that I find problematic, but there is 1 or 2 of these features that is quite useful. So we finished with our Mount Fuji, so we'll close that. And here's another image from Japan, and of course we've all done this. We've been hastily trying to get a grab shot, and we've managed to lose the subject's foot out of the bottom of the frame. And prior to having the generative expand tool, we would have been in a bit of trouble. So let's have a look at what I did here. I've taken the image and I've used the crop tool, and I need to just reset that because we are looking at an image that size. The image was originally this, and I've just expanded it to here using the crop tool. So I've created an extended canvas, and now we need to try and fill it in. But of course, another part of the tool set that comes with the generative AI is an improved remove tool. So before we get on to using the generative expand, you can see here that there were a bunch of people in the background, and a couple of these people here are fairly bright clothing, and I'd like to get rid of those. So what we can do, that was a very quick example, but let's just do it this way. We can just use our lasso tool to draw around the people we want to get rid of. And of course, then we come up here and we can use the remove tool on our new contextual toolbar. And this is where the improvements are claimed to have been made, in that remove tool's algorithms are now improved, and we can see the results for ourselves. We certainly, when we use the remove tool, we don't get the options when we're using the generative fill. We don't get the options to choose alternatives. We just get one basic option that the software decides what it's going to do. And again, depending on the speed of your computer, it will take a short time or a long time to generate the removal of the people that I wanted to get rid of in the picture. And there it is, and it's removed the people. Now, as I said, you don't get an option, you just get a new layer here. And let's just have a look at this little girl's hair to see how it handled that, because I just drew pretty roughly around there, and it's created a little bit of a problem here where it's lost some of the fine edges of the hair. But look, overall it's not a bad option. Here's the one I created earlier. I was probably a little bit more selective in doing that, and I've managed to remove those people. But you can see here it's added a few funny little artifacts, and so probably what I would want to do would be to clone out that, and give us a slightly better image. But okay, the remove tool has been improved, and again, you might need to use a couple of iterations to get the result you want, and then tidy up some of the mess afterwards. So that's not looking too bad. But now what we want to do is we want to expand this image, and we want to get the feet of this young girl back into the picture. So as I said, with the remove tool, if you have tried to remove an area and you're not happy with the result, the only option is to get rid of this layer and do it again, reselect and try it again. So that sort of works okay. But now what do we do about this generative expand? Well, we've expanded our canvas. We now have a black area. What we need to do is to make a selection around that, and of course we can use our rectangular marquee for that. And all we need to do is draw a marquee around that part, and then with the add to selection box active, we can just draw in this little bit as well. And then all we need to do then is just go to generative fill and generate, and it will Firefly Fill and Expand is the model that we're going to use. There are some options to choose other ones, but let's stick with the latest tool and see how well it does. And of course, when we're using the generative expand, we do get our 3 options to try. So here we go. It's generated 3 options. Because of this area of ground was pretty straightforward, there's not a big deal there. Let's just turn off. There we go. That's the bit we've generated. Now, it's done something slightly funny with the little girl's toe, but it's not too bad. And we look at our second option, it's also similar, and the third option, and really there's not a lot of difference between them. I think probably the first or second one is the one that works the best. And now of course we've got an image that we could use if we wanted to. So once you're done with that, then and you've got your generative expand option available, you would then just merge that down into your generative fill option, merge it down, and that's the one I made earlier. Let's turn that off. So now we've got an image that we've had improvements here. We've done a little bit of remove here. What we would probably do when we get to this area that's a little bit problematic, I would just probably go in with the patch tool and just look at getting rid of those things. They're fairly out of focus in the background, so they're not too much of an issue. And there we've got an image that's entirely usable. So that part of the toolkit works quite well, and if you're in a situation where you've messed a shot up that you really need to use and you want to use that expanding canvas option and the generative expand, this new tool works pretty well. But there are a couple of other tools in the arsenal that they've improved, and we'll have a look at those now. And just a little reminder about the new improvements to this generative expand is when we've made our selection and we go to generative fill, what we've got is we've got an option here, and you can see the little symbol FI. If you click on that, it's going to give you the different options for the different models that it uses for that generative expand. And there are also some other third-party tools as well. These will cost you credits for your AI credits for this, but I think this one seems to work the best, so I would go with that. So now let's look at a couple of these other tools that they claim to be improved, and we'll have a look and see how well they work. Now the next couple of tools that we're going to have a look at are things that I think are moving us away from photography and getting us into the murky field of graphic art. But this is one of the tools available. Let's have a look at it. I've seen some examples online and they were nice simple ones that worked really well. And this is part of this generative fill procedure. But what we can do here is we can add what's called a reference image to create content for the photo. Now here's a photograph from Scotland with some sheep on the road. I also have a photograph. I don't have a sheepdog, but I've got another friendly dog that I photographed some time ago. I'm going to use this as the reference image to put into the background. So how do we do this? Well, firstly we need to get our lasso tool, and I want to put this dog somewhere in the middle here where it looks interesting. So what we're going to do is we're going to say generative fill, but instead of putting a prompt in here, which I never use anyway, but we click on this little box that says use a reference image. So I'm going to choose a reference image. I've already got this one set aside. That's the version of the dog. It's going to analyze the dog in the picture. Now I've got a couple of options here. I can reference the object, and it's picked out the subject, which is the dog here, or I can add the whole image in. Well, obviously I don't want the whole image, I just want the dog. And what I want to do I want to swap the selected area? No, I just want to place the dog into the selected area. So now I just click on generate, and it goes away, picks up that image of the dog, and then tries to place it into the image. But then something quite interesting will happen when you've got an image that doesn't quite match the content of the background, and you'll see what happens when I get this. And it's going to create me a dog that appears to be based on my original dog. Here's my original dog here. Here's what it's put in. Something weird has gone on with the feet there. Let's have a look at the other options. Yeah, that's sort of kind of similar, and that one's even weirder because he's now got 5 legs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So yes, new improved tools. Let's have another go at this, generate again, and we'll see if this works. Now, this is not something that I would consider doing, because this is moving us away strictly from photography as such. I'm not averse to patching areas, expanding areas, but when we're placing whole different content into a photograph, I think we're moving away from the pure photography aspects. Now, you can see there's several versions of this dog. Got some very strange feet happening. So yeah, the examples I've seen online work with fairly simple objects, but when you get something a little bit tricky, it goes a bit haywire. So I've got a 5-legged dog there. Maybe that's sort of like the old Tasmanian 6-fingered hand, but yes, obviously it's not quite there. So we'll have a look at another example. Now for another attempt at this reference image generative fill, I'm going to try something also a little bit challenging, but the examples they use in the YouTube videos are really simple ones. I obviously want to stretch the boundaries a bit. We want to try something different. Now I've got a nice photograph here of Glencoe in Scotland, and what could be better than to put a couple of polar bears in there? So let's have a go at doing that. So what I think would be nice if the polar bear was somewhere sitting around on this rock. So let's make our selection around here as to the area where we want this polar bear and the cub to sit. So we've now go into our generative fill, and of course we want to use that reference image. Now what you're going to need to do if you want to use this is you need to save out a version of that reference image into a folder where you can find it easily. I've done that here. We've got the polar bears, and let's see what it does. It's going to analyze the image and try and choose the subject out of this, and as you can see, it's made a selection of the object. Or if I went to the whole image, I don't want the whole image, and again I just want to place that into the selected area. So let's click on generate and see what sort of a job it does with this, because you know, these tools are touted as being the next best thing to not having to go and do a photo shoot. You can just create all these things with stock images or some of your own images, and I find that these really don't work as well as they claim to be able to work. So let's see what we've got. Well, that one looks sort of semi-believable, but something's happened to the bears. They're bleached out, they're way too bright. Let's have a look at another one and another one. Yeah, they're not quite working. Let's generate again. We'll get a fairly similar result. It just does slightly different permutations on this. It's sort of tried to place the bears within that background, but quite honestly it doesn't look at all realistic. It's obviously pretty terrible. Yes, you could go there and say, yeah, okay, well let's rasterize that image so that we've got a layer to work with, and we could go up here and we could do some curves, and we could clip that to the layer below to sort of darken that down. But then, what happens? You do that because it's got a mask associated with it, which is the area I drew with my marquee tool. I can't really readily do that. So let's just get rid of that. So the long and the short of it is, with these new and improved reference image and generative fill, I think they work with simple examples, but when you get into anything a little bit more exotic, it doesn't really work that well. So there's the summation. These are the newer tools in Photoshop. Really the only thing that I think is worthwhile is that slight improvement to the generative expand on the canvas. That works quite well, but all of the others are really not doing anything that we can't already do. And in the case of this reference image, I think it's pretty much only useful for very simplistic types of examples, and anything a little more complicated just doesn't work well enough. So thanks for watching. Hope that's been useful, and I'll see you again soon.